So picture this. A man queues outside a Swatch store at 4 in the morning, but he isn't buying a Royal Oak. He is buying a pocket watch costing $415 with AP's name stamped on it. By noon, the resale price has already fallen 60%. Now, the crowds are gone. The hype is gone. And somewhere in Brassus, a $50 billion reputation is quietly taking on water. The machine. There's a specific kind of arrogance that doesn't look like arrogance at first. It looks like exclusivity. It looks like taste. It looks like a brand that cares so much about its product that it refuses to let just anyone have it. Audemars Piguet spent about a decade building that story, and they built it brilliantly. But here's what the story actually required underneath all the polish. You walk into an AP boutique. You want a Royal Oak, the steel 3-hand, 41mm, tapisserie dial, the one you've been thinking about for 2 years. The sales associate is warm. The space is beautiful. There's a small museum in the corner, lit cases with vintage references, a display about the manufacture in Brassus. And then, after about 20 minutes of conversation, it becomes clear that the watch you want isn't available. There's no timeline. There's no queue number. What there is, the associate explains carefully, is a relationship. And relationships take time. What they don't tell you directly, but what every forum post and collector community thread has documented exhaustively, is how the relationship actually works. AP boutiques operate on purchase history. They always have. But under the boutique-only model that François-Henri Benamias locked in by eliminating all independent authorized dealers, that system became the only system. There's nowhere else to go. No gray market AD to sweet talk. No multi-brand retailer with a different allocation philosophy. Just AP's own boutiques and their internal hierarchy of who deserves what. The hierarchy runs something like this. A new client with no purchase history waits 12 to 24 months if they're offered anything at all. A client who has bought a code 11.59 or an offshore might wait 6 to 12. Someone with multiple AP purchases behind them gets a Royal Oak in 3 to 6 months. VIPs and cultural figures get fast-tracked, sometimes immediately. So you do the math. You spend $60,000 across 2 watches you didn't really want, in order to earn the right to be considered for the one you did. You wait, you show up. You maintain the relationship with your sales associate, the way you'd maintain a professional contact you need a favor from. And then, maybe, you get the call. There's a collector on Watch You Seek who described spending $48,000 on an offshore and 2 other references over 14 months. He got the call. His Royal Oak Jumbo was allocated. He wore it for 3 months, listed it, sold it. Said he didn't love it anymore by the time he got it. That detail sat with me for a while. That's not a transaction. That's a loyalty tax. And AP called it exclusivity. The observation that most coverage misses: AP didn't build a wait list. They built a system that converted customer loyalty into involuntary spending. The prestige of the Royal Oak didn't fund the program. The program funded the prestige of the Royal Oak. Scarcity is only valuable when it feels like scarcity rather than gatekeeping. For years, AP convinced its customers those were the same thing. They aren't. And the people who figured that out first weren't critics or journalists. They were the collectors who had already played the game, won it, and walked away feeling strangely hollow. The man who spent $48,000 to earn a watch he sold 3 months later isn't bitter about the watch. He's reassessing the institution. That reassessment, multiplied across thousands of collectors in dozens of markets, is the actual story here. There's one more layer to this. AP's allocation process is opaque by design. There's no published criteria, no official tier structure, no document you can point to that confirms the hierarchy described above. What exists is a mountain of consistent, cross-geography collector accounts. The unghosted waitlist survey of 45 reports published earlier this year, and the structural logic of the operation itself. When a company runs boutique-only distribution and every point of sale tracks client purchases across a global database, the allocation has to be based on something. The collector accounts confirm what the structure implies. But AP has never officially acknowledged the framework, which means buyers are navigating an environment they can only infer. They're spending money to decode a code nobody will confirm exists. The sales associate sitting across from you, however warm and knowledgeable, is not in a position to explain the rules clearly. Their boutique's relationship with the manufacturer depends on not stating those rules out loud. So the collector learns by doing, spends, observes, adjusts, spends more. The boutique experience is designed to feel like hospitality. Underneath it, it functions like a tenure process with no written criteria and no appeals procedure. That's the architecture. If the rules are unwritten, they can always be rewritten for whoever matters most at any given moment. It's a useful structure if you intend to stay in control forever. It's a fragile one if your customers ever start comparing notes. And they did. They've been comparing notes on Watch You Seek and Watch Crunch and Reddit for the better part of 3 years now. The threads run long. The accounts are consistent, and the picture that emerges is of a loyalty program that never called itself one, built by a company that would find the term deeply offensive. Which collector moment broke you here? Let's move on. AP made its customers prove themselves before spending. Now the question is whether the brand can prove itself to them. Where does this go next? The architect. François-Henri Benamias joined AP in 1994 and became CEO in 2012. He spent the following decade turning a respected Brassus manufacturer into something approaching a cultural institution. The boutique-only distribution model was his, the AP house concept was his, the strategy of placing watches on the wrists of musicians, athletes, and creatives before that association cost anything was his. So was the decision to pull out of multi-brand authorized dealers entirely, concentrating every point of sale under AP's own roof. The results were undeniable. Revenue went from roughly 400 million Swiss francs annually at the start of his tenure to an estimated 2.35 billion by the time he left in 2023. The Royal Oak became the defining reference for what a steel sports watch could be worth. AP cemented its place in the collector shorthand of the Big Four, alongside Rolex, Patek Philippe, and Richard Mille, not by compromising toward the market, but by demanding the market come to them. Here's what that success obscured. The boutique strategy was architecturally dependent on one condition: demand always outrunning supply. When collectors are desperate to get in, the loyalty tax feels like a privilege. When demand softens even slightly, the same setup starts to look like what it always was: a mechanism for extracting spend from people who wanted something they weren't sure they'd get. Benamias left at the end of 2023. The secondary market had already begun its correction from the 2021 and 2022 speculative peak. The AP index was declining roughly 7 to 8% annually. Code 1.59 references were sitting at or below retail, a fact politely noted in collector forums and impolitely noted everywhere else. The machine he built was finely calibrated for a rising tide. He handed it to his successor as the tide was turning. What he also left behind was a posture. AP was above the industry, above the trade shows, above the traditional distribution networks. AP didn't need the watch fair circuit. AP didn't need multi-brand retailers. AP didn't need to participate in the communal rituals of an industry it had clearly outgrown. That posture was earned in the good years. In a different climate, it would become a liability. One more thing worth saying about the Benamias era: the hip-hop strategy, the celebrity relationships, the positioning of the Royal Oak as the watch of cultural credibility. All of it worked because the watch deserved it. Strip away the marketing and the relationships and the halo, and what you still had was a 50-year-old design that had never stopped being correct. The Genta sketch was right in 1972, and is still right. The cultural strategy amplified something real. That matters. Because what comes next is a story about what happens when a brand starts to believe the amplification was the thing, not the object underneath it. Ilaria Resta inherited both the machine and the posture. She may not have known, in January 2024, how much both of them would be tested over the following 18 months. The architect left. The tide shifted. And then something stranger happened. The person brought in to steady things almost didn't stay either. The departure nobody was supposed to know about. Ilaria Resta became CEO of Audemars Piguet on the 1st of January 2024. She came from Firmenich, a Swiss flavor and fragrance company, not watchmaking. She was the first female CEO of a top-tier Swiss watch brand, a fact the industry noted carefully, and AP's messaging around her appointment was pointed. This was radical openness, a new chapter, a brand willing to evolve without abandoning what made it. She spent her first year making some interesting moves. She eliminated the formal distinction between men's and women's watches in AP boutiques and marketing, arguing the company had been wrongly predefining its buyers. She announced AP would return to Watches and Wonders Geneva for 2026 after years of absence. She talked about reducing the average age of AP buyers and described Generation Z's interest in mechanical watches as a counterintuitive cultural moment worth building toward. She commissioned the Arc manufacturer in Brassus, a 23,700 square meter facility designed to accommodate 700 employees and push annual production towards 65,000 watches. And she was getting results. The number of women entering AP boutiques and buying for themselves in the US jumped 11% in 2 years. Revenue from January to August 2025, she told Luxury Tribune directly, was up 12% year-on-year. The numbers looked good. Externally, the narrative was coherent. A company evolving under new leadership without losing what made it worth leading. Then, in September 2025, Astrid Wendlandt at Miss Tweed reported that Resta was leaving. Miss Tweed has a documented track record of breaking accurate luxury industry news before anyone else confirms it. The sourcing was specific. Industry contacts had mentioned Resta's imminent exit at Geneva Watch Days. More concretely, she had quietly joined the board of Prada Group as an independent non-executive director in late July 2025, accepting a €100,000 annual fee. Wendlandt was direct. It was unusual for the CEO of a major luxury brand to join another major luxury company's board. It indicated she was exploring what came next. AP issued a formal denial within 24 hours. The statement said the rumors were unfounded. Resta herself told Luxury Tribune the same week. The rumors were unfounded. She had full board support, and the results had not weakened. But Miss Tweed updated its story and held its ground. The board, it reported, was already searching for a replacement and actively did not want the internal teams to know. The reason for the public denial wasn't confidence. It was information control. News of a CEO search, especially one concealed from a company's own workforce and boutique network, is destabilizing to the relationships that run the business. Resta stayed. The Prada board seat remained. And AP spent the months that followed presenting a unified front to the press while the watch industry processed what it had just witnessed. I keep coming back to this. A brand that spent years telling collectors to trust the relationship, trust the system, trust that loyalty gets rewarded, ran its own CEO succession in secret, and publicly denied what the industry's best-sourced reporter had documented. The board kept its own employees in the dark. And the radical openness language was still going out in press releases the same week. For a brand that charges customers tens of thousands of dollars as proof of trust before they're allowed to spend more, the credibility of the institution is load-bearing. It isn't a nice-to-have. It's the product. When the institution behaves like information is something to be managed rather than shared, the people paying the loyalty tax are watching. Not all of them forgive that. Some of them just stopped paying. And while this was happening quietly behind the scenes, AP made a very public move that was supposed to announce a new era. It announced something else entirely. Coming back to the table. In October 2025, Audemars Piguet confirmed what the industry had quietly expected for months. They were returning to Watches and Wonders Geneva for April 2026, their first appearance since 2019. The announcement was framed as evolution. Resta described it as the beginning of a new journey, a great platform to connect with the industry, an expression of the brand's commitment to openness. On one level, the return was substantive. AP brought work to Geneva that was, by any fair reading, unusual. The concept was called the Atelier des Établisseurs, a name drawing from the établissage system that had shaped watchmaking in the Vallée de Joux for generations, where specialized craftspeople produced individual components that were assembled into finished watches. Audemars Piguet was founded within that structure. The reference here felt less like a historical callback than a return to a way of working the brand had moved away from. Three pieces emerged from the atelier. The galettes, built around a yellow gold case shaped like a lake pebble from Lac de Joux, with a dial of natural stone, no hour markers, and a bracelet of individually shaped pebble links connected by ball-joint gold, the nomade, the peacock, none of them for the standard catalog. Each of them for a different kind of conversation with collectors who were already wondering what AP's next creative chapter looked like. But the trade press wasn't entirely measuring AP on the quality of those pieces. A Blogdo watch said, what quite a few people were thinking, and not quite saying, the experiment of going it alone had not worked as well as hoped. Under Audemars, AP had left the trade show circuit with a specific posture. They didn't need it. Boutique-only distribution meant the fair served a relationship between brands and retailers, and AP no longer had retail relationships to manage. They were, as a matter of stated strategy, above it. 7 years later, they were back. Rejoining a room you declared you no longer needed isn't collapse. Strategies do recalibrate. Markets change. But in the context of a brand whose core customer value proposition had been built on the feeling of belonging to something that didn't need to explain itself, the optics land differently. The collectors who queued at boutiques and spent on watches they didn't want and waited on lists that were never quite explained, they watched AP walk back into the industry it had scorned, call it a great platform, and move forward. Some of them noticed. Some of them didn't care. And some of them filed it alongside the CEO drama and the allocation process and the secondary market softening, adding it to a ledger they were still deciding what to do with. There's something specific happening here worth naming. Under Audemars, AP's isolation from the industry was a form of confidence. It communicated, "We don't need you." The collectors who were inside the tent found that posture appealing. It validated their own taste. If AP didn't need the industry, the people AP chose to sell to were choosing something that stood apart from the crowd. Under Resta, the isolation was quietly dissolved. AP rejoined the show. The language shifted to openness, connection, community. Those are good words. But for the collector who spent years building purchase history precisely because AP had made it clear that not everyone was welcome, the shift toward openness is worth examining. If AP is now for everyone who can find a Swatch store and queue at 4 in the morning, what exactly was the loyalty tax for? All of that would have been containable. Internal drama, a strategic adjustment, the usual friction of a brand in transition. Then came May 16. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. You walk into a store or browse online, and everything looks the same, but behind the scenes, there's a system. Prices aren't always fair, availability is controlled, and one bad decision can leave you overpaying for something that doesn't even hold its value. That's why I created a complete free insider guide to buying watches. Inside, you'll find the best watches to buy, the watches to avoid, and how to choose a watch that actually fits your style and budget long-term. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the free guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. The Royal Pop. The collaboration between Audemars Piguet and Swatch was announced in early 2026 and launched on May 16. The anticipation was real. The Moon Swatch in 2022 had shown what happened when Omega and Swatch worked together. Chaos, queues around the block, a resale market that spiked to roughly $2,400 on day one for a watch that retailed at $260. The template existed. The formula seemed obvious. What people expected was a wristwatch. Something with the Royal Oak's octagonal bezel, the integrated bracelet, Swatch's bioceramic case, and System 5-1 movement. Accessible, irreverent, a little bit brilliant. The sort of thing you'd wear to a barbecue while your actual royal oak sat in the safe. The sort of thing that would bring in a new audience without touching the royal oak's positioning. What arrived was a pocket watch. Not metaphorically. Literally a 40mm timepiece with a calfskin lanyard, designed to be worn around the neck, clipped to a bag, or kept in a pocket. The watch head detached from its case, back in a modular design that referenced AP's 19th century pocket watch heritage. It was clever, well made for what it was, and completely wrong for the audience that had been camping outside Swatch stores since Thursday night. Crowds formed worldwide on launch day. Police were called to the Westfield Parley, two shopping center near Paris, as the situation outside became unmanageable. Somerset Collection in Michigan was shut down before the sale could start. Several Swatch boutiques never opened that Saturday at all. The Bloomberg headlined the morning of May 16. Swatch stores shut as Audemars Piguet collaboration causes mayhem. On secondary markets, the royal pop peaked and then fell 60% within days. The speculative tier that drives day one flipping disconnected immediately once it became clear the product wasn't wristwatch format. It was pocket watch format, unlimited production, and retailing at $415. The Moon Swatch comparison fell apart. A pocket watch on a lanyard doesn't carry the daily wear urgency that gave the Moon Swatch a durable secondary floor. By the end of the first week, most royal pop references were trading close to retail on gray markets. The people who queued at 4 in the morning and paid premiums on day one had lost money. Here's the number that actually matters. In the same week as the Royal Pop launch, the average secondary market dealer price for AP Royal Oak references dropped 3%, from $67,100 to $65,100. The price recovered broadly in the weeks that followed. But for about 7 days, the most important watch in AP's catalog took a measurable halo hit from a $415 pocket watch made by Swatch. Resta later said AP's website received more than 10 times its annual visitor traffic in a single day. She declined to confirm whether that had converted to watch sales. So what was the Royal Pop actually for? AP's answer was consistent across every interview. This wasn't about next quarter's revenue. It was about making the brand visible to a generation that couldn't afford a Royal Oak today, but might become collectors in 10 to 15 years. Younger buyers needed a point of entry. The Royal Pop was a way to let someone hold AP's heritage without the barrier of a $60,000 watch. Resta framed it explicitly as a 15-year play. That might be true. The strategy has internal logic. But now, picture the collector who spent $48,000 building purchase history over 14 months in order to earn the right to be considered for a Royal Oak. He played the game. He paid the loyalty tax. He proved himself worthy of the brand's trust by demonstrating with his wallet that he understood the hierarchy. And then AP handed its name, its octagonal crown protectors, its legacy, to a lanyard accessory that anyone could buy at a Swatch store. No relationship required, no history required, no queue, no wait, no proof of commitment. $415. The brand built on the idea that you have to earn access cannot simultaneously be a brand you grab at a mall. Those are not compatible identities. They cannot both be true. The secondary market said so in 1 week. What AP was actually selling with the Royal Pop was reach, impressions, cultural surface area among an audience that will never queue at a boutique and build purchase history over a year. That's a coherent strategy, arguably. Omega's Moon Swatch collaboration worked partly because Omega's brand identity wasn't exclusively built on restriction. Omega has always been more accessible in spirit, more willing to play with democratization, more comfortable with the idea that different price points serve different audiences without cannibalizing each other. AP is not Omega. AP's entire identity for the past decade has been built on the premise that not everyone gets in. That's the product, as much as the watch itself. The feeling of belonging to something selective is what the loyalty tax is actually buying. The Royal Pop didn't just put AP's name on a lanyard, it put that selective feeling on a lanyard. And $415 does not feel selective. There's a specific image that kept circulating in the watch forums after May 16. Someone had photographed a royal pop sitting next to a full-price royal oak on a desk. The caption was a single question: which one took more to acquire? The image didn't need an answer. The question was the point. One watch had required years of relationship building, tens of thousands of dollars of foundational spending, and months of waiting for the right call. The other required a Friday night in a queue and $415. AP's name was on both of them. AP's website traffic spiked 10 times annual volume in a day. Most of it was people who had never considered buying a royal oak before. They landed, looked around, and left. Whether that exposure produces collectors a decade from now, nobody can honestly say. What isn't uncertain is how the people who had spent years inside AP's boutiques felt watching it happen. Which of these moves bothers you most? Drop it below. The royal pop didn't break the brand, but it broke something more important: the internal logic that had held the whole machine together. The debt comes due. A brand gets to be as demanding as its customers allow. For years, AP's customers allowed a great deal. They spent on watches they didn't love to prove they deserved ones they did. They accepted opaque allocation systems and told themselves it was about relationships. They watched the boutique-only model eliminate every alternative and adapted. When the secondary market was rising, all of that tolerance made sense, because at the end of the process, what they received was worth significantly more than what they paid. The calculus worked. The secondary market has been softening since 2022. The AP index down roughly 7 to 8% annually. Code 1, 1.59 references, sitting at or below retail. The ones the allocation process used as a loyalty toll. The ones collectors bought to earn their way toward the watch they actually wanted. The Royal Oak Offshore. Once the loudest watch at any gathering, now trading at 23% below retail. Still a great watch. Not the trophy it was. In that environment, paying a loyalty toll to earn access starts to feel less like a privilege and more like a bad deal. The Royal Oak still commands a premium above retail. The Jumbo Extra Thin at 2 to 3 times for unworn examples, the 15,510 at a 41% average premium as of the second quarter of 2025. The collector consensus around the core references remains intact, but the premium has compressed from its peak. And the collector who spent the last 2 years building purchase history is quietly recalculating whether the arithmetic still works the way it once did. AP knows this. The ARC manufacturer is a long-term infrastructure bet. 23,700 square meters, 700 employees under one roof, a production target of 65,000 watches annually against roughly 50,000 in 2025. The Marin facility in Geneva expanded nearly 4-fold to 9,000 square meters for bracelet and casework. These are investments made by an institution that believes in its own future. They should be taken at face value. But here's what manufacture capacity doesn't fix. The man on Watch You Seek who spent $48,000 and sold the Royal Oak 3 months after he got it isn't going to be won back by a bigger factory. The collectors who followed the CEO departure story through public denial, who watched the Watches and Wonders return, who did the mental arithmetic on the Royal Pop, they haven't left. Most of them are still in the forums. They still check the secondary prices. They haven't abandoned AP. What they've started doing is auditing the institution the way AP audited them. And here's where I want to be honest about something. The financial case for AP's future is real. The Royal Oak is one of the most significant design objects in modern watchmaking. Full stop. The movement architecture, the integrated bracelet, the case finishing, the history going back to the overnight sketch in 1971. None of that disappears. Brands built around objects that are actually great have a durability that brands built around hype alone simply don't. AP has something that's worth protecting. But a watchmaker is not only its best reference, it's the totality of how it behaves. Toward its customers, toward the industry, toward its own people. AP's conduct over the past 3 years has been complicated, brilliant in some places, corrosive in others, and the collectors who know it best are watching to see which version prevails. The $50 billion question is whether AP can convert cultural reach back into cultural trust. The Royal Pop got 10 times annual website traffic in a single day. That's reach. Whether anyone in that traffic becomes a collector, or whether they simply become someone who will spend years navigating a boutique trying to prove they deserve to be one, that's the gap AP is working to close. Drop a comment. Are you still chasing a royal oak, or has the game stopped being worth playing? The brands that command real loyalty don't do it by making people feel lucky to spend money. They do it by making people feel seen. AP spent a decade perfecting the former, building a machine so precisely calibrated to manufactured desire that customers lined up to pay taxes on their own aspiration. The machine worked brilliantly for as long as the conditions held. And then the conditions shifted. The market softened. The CEO drama leaked. The trade show posture reversed. The Royal Pop confused the audience it was supposed to charm. And through all of it, the machine kept running the same way, demanding proof of loyalty from the very people whose loyalty it was beginning to lose. That's not implosion in any financial sense. The revenue is fine. The new manufacturer is bigger than anything AP has built before. The Royal Oak is still the Royal Oak, and it will still be the Royal Oak 5 years from now. But the relationship between a company and the people who believed in it runs on a different currency. And that currency, once spent down far enough, takes longer to earn back than any quarterly result can measure. The collectors who know this brand best are still watching closely. They're in the forums. They're checking the secondary prices every week. They haven't left. What they're waiting for is something AP hasn't fully delivered yet. Clear, credible evidence that the institution understands what it spent over the past 3 years and is seriously prepared to earn it back. So what do you think of AP now? Let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe.